good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. While we continue to keep a close eye on the latest COVID-19 infections, tonight on the show we'll be focusing instead on industries reaching its tipping point. Over the next 30 minutes or so, we'll discuss the recent closures of media companies, hotels and retailers. But first, let's begin with a look at the political storm brewing in Johor. According to Malaysia Kini, the tension between UMNO and BERSATU could lead to snap polls in the state. Sources say that Johor BERSATU had been complaining about political appointments, including to state GLCs, had not been done in an equitable manner. Now, Johor UMNO had reportedly countered BERSATU's pressure for more appointments with the threat of state elections. Sharaad, what do you make about these increasing tensions down south?
It's fascinating because on one hand, Melissa, it does reveal something about the motivations of politicians and political groupings, around questions of access to resources like GLCs. So that seems to be at the center of it. It also signals, Melissa, the question, and this was brought up by two BERSATU state assemblymen, about the nature of BERSATU's relationship in this coalition. Remember, in February, they left the Pakatan Harapan and together with one defector from PKR, joined UMNO and PAS to form, and Barisan Nasional, so right. MIC as well, to form, a state government. So on one hand, they thought they were going from strength to strength, but they actually found themselves with less leverage, right, within a weaker position. And that's also, I think, the source of some unhappiness on the part of BERSATU leaders there in the state of Johor.
Okay, so perhaps, the question of leverage is thrown in the mix. But I do want to kind of take a closer look at what has been reported as the source of instability, this tussle, so to speak, over GLC positions between allies BERSATU and UMNO. Now, it's quite troubling to me. I'm not sure how it will come across in terms of optics to the rest of the public, especially to the Johorians, what this kind of political jostling or this tussle over GLC positions looks like in a time of pandemic when we should all be focused on, looking at how we can exit from this MCO and what's going to happen to the economy afterwards. So to have kind of politicking at this very moment, jostling over positions, feels a little, in kind of tone deaf, in my opinion. Yeah,
Melissa, that's also very interesting because it comes after, a statement by the Prime Minister, whose, of course, party is BERSATU, that people are fed up of politics. And because, that itself needs to be unpacked. But to the extent that, Johor and state dynamics differ from national dynamics, I think it's very important to look at some of the numbers. And the numbers have to do with the balance of power in the state assembly, right? So altogether, the Pakatan parties, PKR, DAP and Amanah have 27 seats. Now, if you take BERSATU out of the equation for PRIHATIN Nasional, you have a total of 18 seats. So BERSATU is very important, right, to establish the PRIHATIN, configuration, right, as the dominant force in the state. Now, BERSATU itself, as we know, is, at least at a national level, a divided party, perhaps most with Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, but still a divided party. It's very unclear. Some of these parties not very stable. So remember, I mentioned just now that it was a PKR member, a Dr. Chong Fat Fun, who actually helped establish the PRIHATIN government of Johor. So PKR itself, with its defectors, the instability in coalitions, BERSATU divided. Maybe a state poll will help clarify where Johorians want their government to be.
Well, that's true, but I wonder whether this is the right time. I know South Korea successfully pulled off an election during, observing social distancing, but in-person voting is a risky prospect at the moment. And I wonder whether, polls can be held at this time.
Well, you mentioned South Korea, and they had a successful election, choosing a new government, a new president.
But they went through extensive sanitization, Sharaad. All the measures were put in place and observed.
And so, I think Malaysians could, in fact, achieve that level of observance of of these issues. Again, it would be very interesting. Maybe it'll just clarify where the state government is. I mean, instability itself is not a good, a precondition for resolving the COVID problem. Perhaps, sometimes politics needs to take precedence, and you need to solve that problem first.
All right, we're going to keep a close eye on the developments in Johor. But in other news, publishing company Blue Ink Media announced today that it is ending both its print and digital publications effective immediately. According to its website, Blue Ink is responsible for 19 publications, including Clio, Female, Her World, Harper's Bazaar, Jelita and Marie Claire. It is estimated that 180 staff lost their jobs. Now, this is the latest closure to hit the media industry after the Edge Financial Daily announced that it would cease publication of its daily paper, this after a 13-year run. And yesterday we heard news that Oriental Daily announced that it would be printing only on weekdays and would reduce its newsstand price. So coming back to Blue Ink, what's interesting is its CEO Azliza Tajuddin said in a statement to employees that the business had already been under tremendous challenge from digital disruption over the past few years. So whether this was an already ailing business tipped over by the MCO and the pandemic.
Well, clearly that seems to be the case, because many people who grew up in the era of magazines and glossy magazines, women's magazines, and the women's magazines that went beyond the women's magazines
lifestyle,
format.
Right?
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, we'll look at this with some sort of poignancy, and because it's kind of ends an era. But the question is, can it reinvent itself? I mean, clearly, Blue Ink has decided it can't reinvent itself, or the challenges are too insurmountable at this point in time to keep themselves together as a business proposition.
Well, I wonder whether, as you said, glossy magazines are, a sunset industry, but whether it's the content, right? So the content of lifestyle and luxury, whether it resonates with people right now. Do we want to know about fashion and luxury, and particularly with glossy magazines sometimes driven by advertisements from luxury brands who themselves are struggling and closing stores around the world?
But Melissa, escapism, I think, is a perennial, need and impulse in the human's psyche. I don't think that ever goes away, no matter how dire the circumstances, the pandemic notwithstanding. All
right, after this, we're going to take a closer look at how hotels are struggling to survive the pandemic. So stay tuned to consider this.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Sebagai anak Pahang, kaweh nak sama-sama menyeru kepada dema semua supaya tolonglah disiplin dan patuh dengan apa yang kerajaan nak kita lakukan. Jangan sesuka hati demo orang nak keluar masuk ke tempat yang tidak sepatutnya, kerana dengan cara demo buat gitu, habis semua orang akan turut mendapat kesan yang tidak baik, kerana bila kita keluar, kita akan mudah terdedah dengan segala virus yang tidak baik, iaitu coronavirus ataupun COVID-19. Sama-sama kita jaga orang yang kita sayang, jaga keluarga kita, jangan sesekali kita mendedahkan diri kita.
Hello, if you've just joined us, you're watching Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me, Sharaad Kuttan. In the past week or so, we've heard news of several hotels around the country closing down due to the MCO. Just how bad is the situation for the hospitality industry? Let's find out with Halim Merican, Acting President of the Malaysian Association of Hotels. Halim, good evening. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Melissa. Good evening.
So, Halim, just a few hours ago, I read news that one of the oldest hotels in Ipoh, the Shuen Hotel, is the latest to permanently shut its doors. Now, can we start the conversation with, establishing some of the basic facts? How many hotels in Malaysia have had to close permanently due to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Okay. Basically, before I start, I would like to just, first of all, explain that tourism, comprises of several stakeholders. So, hotel is one of them. Yeah. So it's and tourism is known to be the second largest income earner for the country, right? So when a pandemic like this happens, and it's an unprecedented one, it's a situation where hotels go into a very difficult situation, yeah? And we, as the Malaysian Association of Hotels, what we've done is when the first MCO was announced on 18th of March, we had done a very quick survey among our members, and we had about close to 500 of our members. In total, Malaysian Association of Hotels have about 1,200 members, and about 50% of them reverted. And the findings at that point, when we spoke to them about the loss of business or cancellations that they've received for the period of April, May, June, the amount potentially that will be lost from this pandemic stood at about 3.3%. 3.3 billion, yeah? And last week, we did a second survey, and the numbers have doubled. We're looking at about 6.4 billion in potential loss. And I can guarantee you that these numbers will still escalate. It will still go up, yeah? Okay. And in terms of the current situation that we're looking at, before we talk about hotels closing down, we have to also consider the fact that why are they closing down? Yeah, and of course it's about the fixed costs that hotels have. And this includes things like the utilities, manpower, salary, which is the biggest chunk of the cost for any hotel operation. A hotel, to break even, generally they have to make approximately 40% occupancy. And that's just to break even.
Sorry, did you say 40%?
40% of occupancy. That would just be break even, yeah? Okay. And what we have gathered from our survey for the first 3 months and then our second survey right up to the end of the year, what we have gathered is the hotel industry will be looking in the area of only averaging about 25% occupancy for the whole year of 2020.
Right, Halim, can I ask you the distinction between hotels that have closed permanently, those that are closing until the end of the year or temporarily, and those that are kind of trying to stay afloat and keep their doors open even through this period? The MCO will probably come to an end in a couple of weeks. We'll still have the problems of borders and maybe a very few incoming tourists from other countries. Could you help us understand that landscape?
Okay. Hence, moving towards about closing of hotels or hotels that are partially closing and those who are still or decided to close temporarily, right? This is all based on the cash flow management, basically. Can I survive if the condition of the business is such, running at below 25% or zero business? So a lot of hotels, what we have come across is, and as you can see, as the week goes by, and I suppose today, yesterday, we get more reports about hotels closing. And that's purely because they are not able to sustain the business. They're not able to pay salaries. They're not able to, there's just no income. The cost of operating is just too high. Okay. So they've gone into areas of either giving the staff unpaid leave for 3 months to 6 months. Some have gone on partial salaries, I mean 50% or less. And some of them have actually even gone towards retrenchment or going towards a mutual separation scheme or even a VSS.
Right. Yeah. Halim, you talked about cash flow management as being one of the issues for why hotels have had to close. Was the pinch felt even before the MCO?
It was a build-up. The minute the COVID-19 was announced in China, which was late December onwards, we started already seeing a lot of cancellation coming through. We started seeing a lot of hotels occupancies or cancellation coming through, occupancies going down. And unfortunately, Malaysia was very dependent on the China market, especially when we talk about the tourists, right? So when China started locking down, that affected us tremendously. And usually December, January, February, we'll get a lot of European business coming across as well. For, it's winter there. They come out for a lot of sunshine here in Malaysia or in Southeast Asia. And unfortunately, when the COVID started to build up and then finally announced as a pandemic, the bulk of the cancellations started coming through in the month of February onwards.
Halim, we have just 1 minute. Sorry, we have just 1 minute. Tell us about the PRIHATIN package. Has it helped you, especially in terms of job retention? Any
package, any PRIHATIN package will definitely help, but unfortunately, it's not enough. Yeah, you talk about minimum wage of any hotel is at least 1,200 ringgit, and based on the PRIHATIN package, we've got two of it, right? We've got the ERP and we have the WSP, right? The Employment Retention Program and the Subsidy Wage Program, right? So, and it's also limited to 200 employees. If you take the hotels which are large hotels, the ones which are 300 rooms and above, their manpower itself is equal to 1. The ratio is 1 to 1 at least, right? So you're talking about 300 staff, and your PRIHATIN is the maximum of 200 staff. And the balance of it will have to be coming from the owners or coming from the operations. So when the cash flow management is carried out, obviously you will start looking and say, okay, we are not going to be able to survive after the next 2 months, after the next 3 months, because your cash flow starts to deplete, right? So and that's where the hotels now start to go into a situation where they're making announcement to say they're ceasing operation, they're closing temporarily or until the end of the year. That's just to curb the exposure that they're getting in terms of the costs.
Right. And to stem the bleeding, right? To stop the bleeding, the hemorrhaging temporarily. Halim, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight. We appreciate your insights, providing us a look into the hospitality industry and whether it's reached its tipping point. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Now, we're going to take a quick break, but after this, we'll find out how retailers are weathering the storm. So stay tuned to consider this.
Hampa nak buat apa kat luar tu? Kerajaan kata duduk di rumah. Pagi-pagi mana duk keluar nak pergi Yorok tu tak payah. Makan je rumah. Orang kata tak boleh keluar sebab apa? Kita bagi potong rangkaian COVID ni. Bagi putus buang hampa buang merkit apa semua senang. Petang-petang tu tak payah duduk kat semurut macam ni. Minumlah dengan ayak, kopi, gantang ke, mi rega ke sedap. Tak gaduh keluar rumah apa semua. Tak payah buat masalah. Ni Kia, main tambah ayak ni boleh keten sikit ni. Abang ni. Lepas tu bawa kunci backhoe tu semalam pergi market. Tinggal dekat apa? Parking kat tanah kewek pula. Aduh, lupa. Makan.
Assalamualaikum. Nama teman Ayuh.
Thank you for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. Let's take a look now at how the retail sector is dealing with the pandemic and the expected recession. Joining us on the line now, we have Datuk Ameer Ali Mydin, Council Member of the Malaysian Retailers Association. He's also the Managing Director of Mydin Muhammad Holdings Berhad. Datuk Ameer, good evening. Welcome to the show. Now, 2 weeks ago, the Malaysian Retailers Association urged the government to declare the COVID-19 pandemic in Malaysia a force majeure, which is a legal provision that will indemnify businesses from their contractual obligations. Now, I understand that you've had consultations with the government. What has been their response to this request?
Actually, at the moment, even yesterday, the association, actually 12 associations got together for the first time and appealed to the government to enact the so-called COVID-19 Act. We have to understand that in a pandemic situation like this, we know this has never happened anywhere, right? And the concern is that the landlord, being the bigger and the stronger party, by the time this MCO is over, they will force the retailers to pay what is due to them. I think a lot of us are really concerned about this. So once we have an act like this, so what happens? There will be more fair play, and that's all we're asking. We're asking fair play, and someone to listen to us, because the concern here is, the end of the day, the bigger players always win out.
Dr. Ameer, so what was the response from government, from the minister?
You know, the response from the government is positive. The only issue we have is how fast the government will respond. Like our neighboring country, they are moving much faster. There's only one day, May 18 Parliament, and we pray and we dua that this act can be passed through during that May 18, because it's better now, otherwise it's going to be too late.
Okay, so Datuk Ameer, if the government doesn't push this through, this proposed Malaysian COVID-19 Act modelled after Singapore, what implications then for retailers?
I think we'll have to dua a lot more. Because I have no trust, seriously. I have no trust on the landlord. I'm also a landlord, I'm also a tenant. So I have these two parts of the equation here. And I really understand how the tenants feel. And the most important thing, as a landlord, I tell my tenants, forget the rental, keep your employees and pay your employees, because they are the worst, the most difficult position at the moment. But I don't think many landlords look at it that way. And I just cannot understand, seriously, why landlords just cannot come out straight up and say, you do not have to pay any rental. Because landlords, seriously, the buildings are primarily owned by bigger players. The only difference you're going to make to the landlord is, instead of paying the 6% dividend or whatever, they'll be paying 2%, or maybe no dividend at all. When we compare to the tenants and the smaller SMEs that are renting, it's not a matter of paying a dividend. There is no money to survive. So let's be fair in this work.
Datuk Ameer, so what is the leverage that the landlord has when it comes to government? Do they have greater lobbying power? Do they represent business or capital interests that's more important than the productive sector, from factories or from retailers, businesses that are actually doing something? Do they have a greater say?
Well, you know, the issue with landlords are they always are the Tan Sri and the Datuk Sri. And the tenants are all the laymen, and, you know, this is the major issue always. Of course, they have direct contact, they have more persuasive and lobbying power. But I hope politicians will have to listen to the riot for once, because at the end of the day, it's a matter of landlords making less money. Not making no money, okay? Making less money, paying less dividends to whoever the stakeholders are, compared to the tenants who are not even surviving at all, and many are going to close down.
Okay, on that note, Datuk Ameer, can you help us understand what is happening with non-essential retailers on the ground? What is their situation at the moment?
You mean they're still around? I thought they were all gone. Seriously. Non-essential retailers have been closed for more than 50 over days. They have zero income. They have hundreds of employees. and the government so-called the 200 employees or the 1,200, it only touches the real smaller ones. The mid-tier and the bigger ones have to pay millions of dollars. For example, my payroll is $15 million a month, and I would not qualify for this $800 at all. So we are all out of pocket, and my colleagues in MRA and the BRO members, they are hardly surviving. They are asking people to stop work. We are going to have a massive retrenchment exercise. People already don't have jobs at the moment, and this is going to be tougher and tougher. I think the government, although everybody has a limited budget, but they should not have put so many restrictions. I think they should have just given every employee $1,200. That would be a simpler and a less painful way of getting us out of this. But now everybody is suffering.
Datuk Ameer, tell us what the next step is then. I mean, you've already made your appeal, you're waiting. I understand you said you're praying, and perhaps the power of prayer might work in this instance. But tell me, what else can be done, especially for businesses that want to survive, that need to see the light at the end of the tunnel?
At the end of the day, the businessmen are entrepreneurs. We will survive. But how many will survive? Many of us will go back to ground zero and start all over again. But we will do it. But I think the issue here is the bigger players or the bigger landlords who are not going to go to ground zero. But the others are. And we will start all over again. I mean, we don't have a choice. I mean, the government is trying its best, I assume. But coming out with so-called SRF loan facilities, the facilities for SMEs, they can apply for 1 million, for example. Not many get approved. The ones that really need the money don't get approved. But in principle, to borrow money to pay rentals and to pay salary is wrong. You don't borrow money. I'm a banker. I'm an ex-banker. You don't borrow money for non-productive use. You only borrow money to increase your productivity. You cannot be borrowing money for your overhead.
All right, Datuk Ameer, then the question is, if the government does look to ease the MCO, particularly for businesses, does that solve the problem? Does that make the cash flow issues then ease up then?
No, I think the main thing here is that the government, we understand there's a balancing act here between health and economic factors. Health, of course, is the most important. One life lost can never be recovered with any money. That is the fact. And I think the government is doing a very good job, seriously. But let's not be too cautious here. Let's not be too cautious. I think there are many players out there who have their SOP. Trust us. Instead of saying, I don't trust anybody, how about the government trust us? Let us open up slowly but surely. I think that's what the government is trying to do. Let's open up slowly but surely and see. There will always be a bad apple somewhere. Close them down. But many of us are responsible retailers. We have our own SOPs. So let's do it. I've been running the hypermarket wire. Doing this all MCO. Come and look at our SOP. As you walk in, you have to sanitize your hands. Then we make you go through what we call an enviroport, where we have a disinfectant. Right. The right chemical, which has been approved by MOH. So that helps. And we expect everybody to wear a mask as they walk in. I cannot stop someone from wearing a mask, not wearing a mask coming in, because I don't have that authority. But we encourage everybody to wear a mask.
Okay, so
you're social distancing.
You're observing all the social distancing and the SOPs put in place. Thank you so much, Datuk Ameer. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We do appreciate you spending time with us tonight and sharing your insights. That's all we have for you tonight on this edition of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me, Sharaad Kuttan, signing off. Thank you for watching and good night.